Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malayan Empire. And I need you all to pretend that this is Friday because this is supposed to be the video from yesterday, which I didn't record because of stuff. I mean, I recorded the Dune video, so I did something, but then it was raining and other stuff, and I wanted to record out here, and I couldn't do that before now. So, well, I technically could have done it like a couple of hours earlier, but once again, life. Because life sucks. Well, not generally, but mine for the moment. Anyway, point is, we're going to wrap up the first half of Return of the Crimson Guard today. That being chapters 2 and 3 of Book 2. And there's a lot going on there. So we'll see how much of that I can remember because I read it yesterday morning. Anyway, let's get this started, shall we? Cheers. So, obviously the big thing going on here is the idea of getting out of touch with time, right? Because like the main thing in chapter 2 of book 2, the eternal return of the chapter, is the return of the Crimson Guard to the city of Unter. And it's not exactly what they imagine it would be, and the whole way it is done is really fantastic and fun in a lot of ways, because they show up. The citizens think it's a joke because they've been gone so long. The empire has moved on. This is obviously the one thing that I feel the Return of the Crimson Guard in general is kind of showing us, and we're going to talk about that once we reach the end of it. And we've still only covered half of it because it is a long book. It's the longest Esselmont novel. But the point is that time moves on. There's always progress. You might not like it, but there's always something. And we see that here because while the Crimson Guard has been gone doing whatever they were doing all over the place, the world has changed. Now the question obviously is, has that also been the case for people like Urko and Chas and others of their ilk, or even for the Empress? Good question. We're going to look into that in a moment. Now we obviously get a lot of like more humorous scenes in here. Once again, I feel Cam Asselman's humor is sadly underrated for the wrong reasons. But we see a lot of that going on. We see once they finally get out of Mael's weird realm where they were trapped for a while, how basically everyone is covered in salt and a lot of them haven't survived. They come across more as ghosts than anything else, which kind of fits with the fact that for the average visitor, like average citizen of the empire, they have been nothing else but ghosts for the last 50 or 100 years. Not 50 years, I think. So that's that. They march up to this. They march up to the palace, and Lessina isn't there, so they just all go home again. And on the way home, they get attacked. Interestingly enough, and this is sort of what I'm trying to get at, is they're not mostly attacked by the army, because there's not that much of an army in Unter left. Mostly they're attacked by the citizens' militia, by the citizens, because the empire is a peaceful place, at least around Unter and places like that. The average city dweller doesn't want to have anything to do with the Crimson Guard attacking the empire. They don't feel oppressed, at least not all of them. They have very much accepted the status quo. They're probably not proud citizens of the empire, but they certainly don't want a war of conquest in their city. So we do get that. That whole thing there. We obviously see some more of those situations where people like someone fundamentally honorable like Shimmer has come to terms with, or has to try to come to terms with it, the fact that times have changed so much, and it takes a while. She's still doing, the decent thing and all of that, but it's still kind of you can see her trying to have, struggling with that all. On the other hand, you have Shimmer and Cowl who are doing I don't know what. I mean, we don't know what, but they do their own thing, and we'll see where all that will be leading in the future. Um, we have that interesting confrontation with Tayshran and Cowl, which, you know, shows how Cowl is very, very focused on one or two very specific things and doesn't understand the personality of Tayshran. And this is super fascinating. I like this very much because once again we don't get, like, unlike the Path to Ascendancy, we get Tayshran as watched from outsiders, from unkind outsiders, and then once again he comes across as like aloof and angry, arrogant and whatnot, and useless fundamentally, whereas he's basically doing his thing to the best of his abilities. Um, now, we also see Kiska for the first time from the outside, from like a different perspective, which is cool. But we'll see how all of that will continue in the next chapters. Mainly, though, we get a huge battle scene that is as chaotic as the entire, well, as a battle in a city could possibly be. We see how the Claw is completely undermined, but also how they're very ineffectual against, well, Avowed of the Crimson Guard, which are superhumanly strong and whatnot. Half of the city gets leveled. We see how the arsenal blows up, and before that we get one of those really funny slapstick almost kind of humor moments with that other guy from the Ragstopper stealing the munitions from the arsenal, which raises a question: did Cartheron Crust, the captain of the Ragstopper, have some info about what will happen, and save the capital by stealing all the Moranth munitions from the arsenal, or was it just a was it just a lucky coincidence? In a way. Now, the interesting thing here is, and we need to talk about Cartheron Crust and the Ragstopper. Within this book, and possibly others, there's sort of a running gag when they show up. The boat is completely derelict. The crew is not exactly much better, but they're always there. They always survive. They always show up again. They always do their thing, whether it is, no matter when. And I like that because, once again, this is one of the signs, like one of the elements of humor and how to do it, because there's more to Cartheron Crust, obviously, especially if you've read The Path to Ascendancy. But when you see his role in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, whether it is in Deadhouse Gates where he shows up, or now here when when the Ragstopper shows up, they're always sort of like this outside of reality kind of thing going on with them. And that's certainly one way to look at them. We'll see in future books what becomes of them. I mean, we'll see more of them in this book as well, so there's that. Now let's look at Cartheron and everyone coming to the city of Cawn. And now this is another one of those ideas where I would say you can see both a criticism of contemporary consumer capitalism, but also very much a certain kind of humor that I would call almost like Pratchett-like humor, when we have the description of the of the factor of Cohen, but also from from the other side, from Urko's army, you have the city. Like the entire city is basically just there to rob blind anyone who shows up, which kind of made me remember that whole idea of Ankh-Morpork in Discworld, when the city is always welcoming invaders because you can sell them all kinds of stuff and then they owe you. And it kind of feels the same here with Khan. They plus, well, on the other hand, they're also way more how to say, well, they're dickheads. It's not as overtly lighthearted as Discworld is. You have that factor being, while funny and ridiculous in his like slapstick moments. You have that conversation with his guard captain and all of that, which is great humor. But there's always that dark undertone because he is still a slave owner and does all those things. And while Pratchett has dealt with slavery at one or 2 points in his career, it's very much not the kind of darkness that you find a lot in Discworld. But I feel they share that that sense of rapaciousness that is inherent in some people. Well, probably in a lot of people. I guess I should start selling merch. No. But this is sort of the idea here that I found fascinating and interesting about Kong, because it's sort of the same thing you already see in the first, like in Path to Ascendancy, although, well, Kellenved kind of avoids that by just like taking over the city and sending in the Hounds of Shadow. But it feels like everyone coming to that city is blasted insect. Everyone coming into that city is basically has, leaves poorer than he shows up, and the only one profiting and profiteering there is the city of Khorne. So I really enjoyed and appreciated that part of it. So, it's cool. So what else should we look at? We a small thing, the meeting, or like the overall like idea of Gello. Now, obviously, Provost something or other, and I keep forgetting her name as Provost. And her troop meeting up with Urko's troop. There's interesting things going on there. Like my favorite thing though is Urko is still collecting fossils, and I really love that small detail with Urko's character, that he's just a huge, like, very much interested in fossils. I said that before, it feels like that was something that whoever played that character came up with as a knack, and probably annoyed the hell out of everyone else on the gaming table. But it made it into the book, so that's really, cool. But once again, we have more of that typical, well, not typical, but we have more of that on, that plot line of Gelal learning the realities, that whole, like, sheltered upbringing meets the realities, the dark realities of the world, and ideally the person comes out as a more realistic, good ruler at the end. Sometimes they don't. We don't know what happens with Gelal yet. But certainly the whole like travel along the river, along this the old sanctuary, the old monastery of Bern, and the conversation she has with her captain there, all of that leads into that whole is part of that. Also, obviously, the fact that we once again learn that war is not exactly pretty. That even though they're and she starts to learn that, or doesn't, because on the one hand she sees all those streets, all those farms and everything destroyed by the Seti, which she thinks is really bad, and the Seti are terrible allies and they shouldn't deal with them because they're not civilized. There's a lot of arrogance going on there with her. And on the other hand, she also doesn't understand the reality of a siege yet, because obviously she hasn't been in one. When she finds all those corpses on the riverside, like how terrible the citizens of Li Hang are, that they can't even observe proper burials during a battle. It's like, yeah, kid. That's how that works. But still, so it still remains to be seen how she adapts to reality overall. We don't know yet because it hasn't happened yet. Now we obviously need to talk about the um, the Battle of Lihang, the Siege of Lihang, the way it is done, the way it doesn't work, and why it is done, um, which I feel is a one of those situations where you learn about the callousness of commanders and what that does to you when they wage that needless war and lose a ton of people just to make sure that their SETI allies remain with them because they wanted to battle. They didn't want to wait because they're obviously not into that kind of warfare. You know, makes sense. You don't bring cavalry to a siege. Well, not that much, I guess. So the whole meaninglessness of the entire exercise is something that I feel is important here, and it's also important that both sides realize that. Storo knows that, and Talk the Elder knows that. That entire exercise was just for show, and it is one of those things that we should, as people, realize that so much what we do is just to maintain appearances, and we willingly take all kinds of damage over time just for the sake of keeping on doing things in a way, keeping up an image and all of that. So there's obviously that. Now I wanted to look at one thing. During the battle, obviously we have that scene during the Battle of Unter, where Lassine goes out and fights and kills Avowed. And I think what we'll learn from that is something that we also see with Urko and others. Is that whole generation of people is very much a group of people that want to do that want those are action oriented people. So obviously Lassine goes out and does stuff herself. It's just that the administrative part of government is something that she's not good at, or probably doesn't even have a lot of interest in. On the other hand, you have also people like Urko, who is probably pretty happy to be back in the field and doing commanding stuff and stuff, things like that. So you have, I don't want to say a lot of people in their midlife crisis, but it feels a bit like that, because what we see here is exactly that. The other part, however, is that with the mage, her archmage, her archmage, high mage, knowing about the conspiracy of Malik Rel and all of that, how isolated Lassine is, and this I feel is a very interesting aspect. It kind of contrasts, but mirrors what's going on with Gello as well, right? She's pretty much alone, and the idea of the person in power on the top being completely alone, partly through their role, but also partly through self-isolation, which I guess is more the part with Lassine. That certainly is something that a lot of us, I guess, also face. It should be. It's tragic, right? It's extremely tragic to see what becomes of Lassine in this book, and how she makes avoidable mistakes, which are the consequences of avoidable mistakes before, because someone was just not able to leave a specific role behind. That role being the Napan royalty that she is in the beginning. She acts according to those things, and she's not able to leave that fully behind. And that's sort of what keeps her trapped and leads to all these follow-on things. And this is definitely one of those things that we should keep in mind and keep at heart, right? By which I mean, we as people, y'all and me, we should constantly re-examine how much of what we do is because of expectations we have for ourselves or others have to us. How much we are falling back to roles that we need to or think we should fulfill and whatnot, and how much we are by that very act isolating ourselves, not asking for help or questions when we could have done it easily, and our friends would have probably done it, but sending them away for all kinds of good rational reasons that we can rationalize really well. Not good reasons necessarily, but some of them are obviously good reasons, and we see here the tragic consequences of that. Because, and this is important here, right? Lassine, the Empress, is trying to do her best. She's trying to do a good job. The tragedy in the whole thing, otherwise it wouldn't be tragedy, is exactly that doing the best here is not the right thing. Or not the right thing for her, sort of, in a way. And I feel with some of these commanders, Urkel in particular, probably also Talk, although we don't know enough about Talk to actually be able to judge that. Chos possibly, Amaron possibly. Those people are certainly on a similar level. I said they've been away from what they have done for a long time. They see whatever they believed in falling apart, so they figure that they know best how to do it. And this is like a thing that we've also seen in all kinds of other parts of life, right? You look at sports or politics. You have these people that were great ones, or musicians are the same, right? They end, or they more or less willingly end their career, or they just leave it in all kinds of other ways. And then at some point they see that the situation is terrible. And because they've kind of done it once, they figure they are the only people who really know how to solve a specific problem. They are the only people who know how to do it right. So they try it again, and then it's pathetic is what it is. There's a lot of pathos in that, because it almost never works. It's very much about letting go and letting the future actually sort itself out, and only doing stuff when people ask you. So there is certainly that. What else is? All right, the boar, the wild man. I have forgotten his name. I feel really bad because he shows up in Night of Knives, right? It's the other survivor of Dassam's sword, the companion of Temper, and I've forgotten his name. The SETI one. I won't even try to remember. I'm pretty sure we'll learn the name again next chapter, but seeing his idea of actually starting a new way and trying to do something to get the SETI into a different kind of future, I feel is kind of the way forward here. And this is the other side that I find interesting. How the SETI plotline that we have now with the Wild Man and so forth is mirroring the Wiccan plotline with Captain Trillish. I think that's his name. I keep forgetting his name. Trillish. Fuck that. Anyway, that dude. So he's recovering, and that's good, and now he has switched sides. And what we see here, what I personally want to point out here, and think is interesting to look at, are the conversations between him and his Sergeant Cord. That is because that's once again peak humor there. Like, their conversations are all the way up there with some of the best of the Steven Erikson two people having like friends kind of conversational humor there. So I like that very much. We'll see where all of this is going. It still has that weird kind of Western kind of feel of the honorable soldiers then throwing the lot in with the with the natives and going up against the corruptness of the state. Now, I'm not enough of a scholar of the Western to make a like a full-on argument here. I think the best Western ever written is not exactly a Western, but it certainly is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, which you all should read if you get a chance and have the stomach for it. But it is one of the best and darkest things I've ever read. Anyway, my argument here would be that this kind of Western is feels sort of apologetic in a way. As a Western, it doesn't exactly, you can't level the same kind of argument against it here because it only reminds me of that. It's not a Western, right? But the idea of having the honorable soldiers helping the natives, the noble savages, well, not exactly noble savages, helping the natives against the corrupt parts of the state and so forth. You do that, and you produce that as a medium, as a movie or a novel, and if you're part of that state, of that nation that oppressed and destroyed all these natives, you can read or watch or whatever, consume that and look at it and say, yeah, but not all of us were bad. The actually good Americans helped the natives against the corrupt Americans. And I'm like, I'm not sure if it works that way, but I can certainly see the appeal of that. So it'll be interesting to see how that whole plot line continues, which obviously is not the case here because, it's in a fantasy world. But I still found it interesting to mention that connection and how that is a thing that you see in a story, basically. I don't want to call it a trope, but a kind of story that you see a lot of in Western movies and Western novels, possibly. Well, once again, not in Blood Meridian. So yeah. The other part that we obviously need to talk about here is the Kyle Eriko thing, although not that much more. We have Kyle's long dream. We have that kind of conversation about where Eriko comes from and the Fel Akai thing. The dream's interesting because this is sort of the other part that I haven't spoken about before. Last time I mentioned that this the Return of the Crimson Guard is sort of that crossroads novel that connects the novels of the Malazan Empire with the Malazan Book of the Fallen and Path to Ascendancy through Kyle's dreams and Eriko as a Fel Akai. It also connects back to the Carcanas trilogy. So this is literally the novel that kind of connects all those threads. I mean, obviously in all of those novels, because they are, once again, a big tapestry of the Malazan world, they're all connected and interconnected all the time, but it is explicit, it's very explicit in Return of the Crimson Guard, and that's something that I find interesting here. Now, obviously, we also have, Skinner and Cowell doing something in Thirlan. I have no idea what. But there's certainly that connection with Lioserg, who may be Oserg, and no one really knows what's going on there. Because, Oserg. Anyway, we'll see where all of that is going in the next chapters. I just found it interesting to once again mention that this one is really connected to everything. Now, I obviously haven't talked about the siege of Li Hang, or the attack on Li Hang, because I'm not sure how much there is to tell about it, apart from the fact that once again, Cam Esselman shows himself as an amazingly talented writer of battles, of sieges, no matter what, like battles, sieges. He's extremely good at that. He does it in like a different way, I guess, than Stephen Erickson, but it's just as effective. It's probably even more effective. I like the way it happens because once again, the amount of attention to detail that he pays is something that really, really makes all of his writing stand out. It's like within fantasy, we see a lot of stuff that is super unrealistic, and I have said before that I'm not exactly a huge fan of realism or like supposed realism in fantasy. I said that when I was like thrashing John Gwynn's Shadow of the Gods, but it's still like interesting to see because Asselman doesn't make it like the point of his descriptions. It's just in there in the details from time to time. It's like, yeah, this guy knows his siege weaponry. This guy knows his armor. This guy knows how all of that works. And that's just cool to see. And I really, really appreciate that. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes on. I guess this is probably already the book with the most with the most battles in when it comes to Malazan, overall Malazan stories. We'll see how many more we get in the near future. Until then, we have to figure out what goes on at the Dolmens, because obviously Kyle and friends have reached the continent where they are. I'm not quite sure, is it already mentioned which one it is? I mean, I kind of know which one it is, but I don't want to spoil anything here, so we don't know. Everyone else is converging on Lihang, where once again the fate of the Malazan Empire, and by extension large parts of the world, are hanging in the balance. And we'll see how it will turn out this time round. I still haven't talked about what goes on Ototaro Island with the Ototaro mines and Ho and everything there. Yeah. I feel it's more, productive if I do that whenever it really comes to fruition or close to fruition. And this time around, there was like basically nothing going on there. We'll just see where it will be going in the next couple of chapters. So probably on Monday. Yeah, I feel that's kind of it for yesterday, I guess. have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you tomorrow, or maybe even later today about something else. And until then, cheers.